she is.
She is.
Seamless.
Good. Okay, so the drinks trolley has arrived. Very good. What are you serving tonight?
Excellent. I was going to go with a spagliato today. It's quite fun. It's a bit like a Negroni, but instead of gin, you have Prosecco. So Campari, sweet vermouth, and Prosecco.
All right, I'll have half a pint. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And a pound of cheese and onion crisps. Okay, top suggestion. Thank you. Okay, today's confession comes from Nigel. Simon and the Collective, my story starts way back in the early 70s when I was just around 13 years old and a pupil at a very traditional state school, St Custard's, where one master... Yes, well, it's the standard name.
Of course.
Yeah. One master was known to stroll around in old-style gowns, now rarely seen outside of university degree ceremonies and Harry Potter. Due to my failing memory, I cannot recall the name of the person who was the victim of my crime, but as you will see shortly, his anonymity may well be for the best. For the purpose of this story, I'm going to call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was a young metalwork teacher with a reputation for a short fuse. On reflection, probably because we were all prone to a rather less than sensible attitude to the various hazards present in his workshop. What with brazing torches, presses and bandsaws in easy reach.
Wow.
We just thought he was bad-tempered. Anyway, that particular year, Mr. Smith was asked to organise and take charge of the annual excursion for our year group and chose a coach trip to the East Coast, a popular destination in our neck of the woods. He duly set about planning the day out with military precision, which would begin with a stop at the quaint coastal village of Robin Hood's Bay, a walk along the coastal path to Whitby Abbey, finally some free time in Whitby, famed for its association, of course, with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Well, a day at the seaside on a school day was a real treat, and by the time the day arrived, we were all bursting with excitement, even more so as we disembarked at Robin Hood Bay after a 2-hour coach ride, stuffing our faces with cheap sweets and pop. Robin Hood's Bay... Yeah, exactly. Robin Hood's Bay consists of a steep main street down to the seawall, with the odd seaside shop along the way. One particular shop was of real interest to the throng of pupils, many of whom popped in for an ice cream or some sweets because they hadn't had quite enough, and I bought a book from there. Our sudden arrival had caught the attention of the shopkeeper, and Mr. Smith explained who we all were and what the plan was for the day, no doubt just passing the time, really. Outside the shop was one of those wire display baskets full of comedy tam o' shanter hats with a fringe of bright red hair.
Oh, yeah.
It transpired that once the throng had left, there were actually none left, and none of them had been purchased.
Oh, dear.
This is a bad thing. So after pottering on the beach for a while, we set off along the cliff path towards Whitby. All was well until suddenly Mr. Smith came marching stridently down the line, bearing the brightest red and angry face I had ever seen. "Get in pairs! Close formation!" he boomed as he stomped along the line. It was clear that something was up, and a little further along the path we found out what it was. Mr. Shopkeeper had alerted the police to the major heist of red-hair-trimmed hats, all of which were now strewn on the beach below the cliff path as news passed down the line, and they had headed us off at the pass, or a well-known caravan park to be precise. We were all route marched to Whitby Abbey and interviewed in the coach by the police before a couple of pupils, Grabber and Peason, I think, were carted off to Scarborough where their parents were expected to collect them. A blazing dressing down followed by a silent car journey home was no doubt in store for them. So, fast forward several years, I am by now very grown up, married with children of my own, and on this occasion visiting my eldest daughter's secondary school for the parents' evening. And as we were walking around, one teacher caught my eye, the very same Mr. Smith of some 30-odd years ago, the metalwork teacher. And despite the fact that he wasn't teaching my daughter, I couldn't leave without introducing myself. When his chair was free, I plonked myself down in front of him. "Mr. Smith," I began, "you probably don't remember me, but you used to teach me metalwork." His face remained impassive until I played my trump card. "Whitby, Robin Hood Bay, school trip, tam o' shanter." The effect was instantaneous. The blood drained from his terror-stricken face as he put his head in his hands. When he lifted his head, his hands were actually shaking. I'm cleaning this up now. That bloomin' trip nearly ended my career before it had started. I almost resigned because of it. I actually wrote a letter. I was going to take a job where I never had to see children and tam-o'-shanters ever again. The very mention of Robin Hood brings me out in hives. And then he signed off by saying, "Mr. Jones took a group to York He didn't do any planning, and he said it went like clockwork. I planned this to death, and it nearly killed me. Bloomin' children. Anyway, let that, this is the thing, school trips, they're very scary things, very work intense. Simon, I seek forgiveness, not for all the incidents in all those years ago in Whitby. I was, after all, completely oblivious of what was going on until I saw Mr. Smith in his rage, but for resurrecting what was clearly the most distressing of memories that Mr. Smith had clearly worked hard to forget, and which I now, on reflection, realise was a little cruel. And I realise also how much work goes into school trips and how irresponsible I was to lark around. Maybe your forgiveness will come my way. Well, it depends, really. It depends how much of that... Very nice.
Very smooth.
How much of that drink Susie has had. What was that drink again?
A spagliato.
Spagliato. Bolognese. Thank you. So, what do you say to Nigel?
Well, I think Mr. Smith should be on the Board of Honour. I think someone should nominate him because he sounds like an excellent teacher. That's really a lot of work that he went into, and I can't forgive them for stealing the hats, whether Nigel was involved or not. So I don't forgive him. It's not fair.
Brother from another gutter.
Well, nothing to be forgiven for, really. Clearly Nigel didn't do anything wrong. Didn't nick off with the tam o' shanters or the hats or anything like that. And the guilty party were found and received their punishment of being taken to Scarborough. So for that reason, I choose to forgive.
Okay. I think Scarborough came into it anyway.
Didn't it?
No,
I think it did.
So.
Yeah.